Be here now. Just be here now.
So as long as we still have this framework to operate in, which is democracy, makes it even more important that we all do it, as opposed to, I think cynicism is often an excuse for inaction. Mm-hmm. It's easier to be cynical and just kind of live your life and say, I don't want to get involved in democracy, because I'm telling you, it's hard work, to show up every single day at gun bill hearings and to, understand the issue and to have these discussions with people who aren't like-minded. That's hard work. It's much easier to be cynical and not get involved than it is to be hopeful and do your part in the democracy.
Welcome to the Road Home podcast with Ethan Nichtern. Join Ethan as he and his guests explore the Buddhist path as it relates to art, culture, activism, politics, Western psychology, and more. If you'd like to support Ethan's podcast, please visit BeHereNowNetwork.com/Ethan.
All right. So hi, everyone. This is Ethan Nichtern for the Road Home podcast. I'm welcoming back a former guest, author, activist, Buddhist meditator, mindful person, leading voice in countering a lot of the political madness that's going on right now, Shannon Watts. So Shannon, thanks so much for taking time out of an incredibly busy moment to talk to me and come back on the podcast.
If nothing else, this is a reminder to me that how mindfulness is so important right now. I think not just for people in the gun violence prevention movement space, but all over the country. I keep going on television and I'm asked over and over again if we're numb. And I kind of wonder if we're traumatized. And so I think it's important to talk about this and how we stay centered and how we stay focused and how we stay well in this country right now.
Yeah. So countering that experience of numbness and hopelessness is a big reason I wanted to, bring you on, because you have been talking about that. But when initially it's always a pleasure to bring you back because your schedule is always busy, working for gun sensible policies. Initially I was thinking about, how important midterm elections are, and people often, the political story of our country seems to be a lot of, Democratic votes, especially POC, get suppressed. A lot of young people just forget to vote, and older people who skew conservative tend to vote every time. So often people think the midterms are generally going to be a disaster in general for progressives, Democrats, et cetera. And so I wanted to bring you on to talk about kind of mindful engagement and how people can make a difference going into, this political environment. And there was already a certain level of numbness or hopelessness in there. And then over the last 2 weeks, the world, I won't say exploded because it's not the first time that any of this has happened, but with Buffalo, with Texas, with other events that aren't even making the news, your life has just re-exploded, right? So what have the last few weeks been like for you? That might be a good place to start.
Well, when you do this work, I'm a full-time volunteer, and I basically, from the moment I wake up to the moment I go to bed, I'm telling the stories of gun violence, tragedies and survivors and victims. And when Buffalo started to unfold, time seems to have no meaning now, but it was a Tuesday afternoon, and that we were talking about yet another teen with easy access to a semi-automatic rifle, even body armor. And clearly someone who was a white supremacist, who intentionally shot and killed Black Americans just going about their daily lives in a grocery store. That is when there's this galvanizing moment in America, right? We don't have, frankly, the bandwidth to pay attention to 110 people being shot and killed every single day, which is several mass shootings, right? Hundreds more wounded. So when national attention is on an issue or an incident, it is so important to show them how they can act, to tell those people, yeah, you can get off the sidelines, and we've made real progress in a lot of places, but we only do that if every single voice, every single vote is focused on this issue. And so that becomes this almost 24-hour cycle, every single day, because we know we have this window. Media tells us that you have about 4 days to shine a light, and then people's attention starts to fade. And so we are racing as fast as we can to put pressure on lawmakers, to get people involved as volunteers, to ask influencers and corporate leaders to stand up. I mean, just, everything up and down the ballot, federal, all the way down to city council, that work. And then when that window starts to close, we have a breather for a second, right? Until something else happens. And in this case, Uvalde happened within days of this other tragedy. And something almost equivalent to what made me start Moms Demand Action, which was the Sandy Hook school shooting, that 19 children and 2 educators could be slaughtered in an elementary school, certainly is going to become a major focus of America's attention. And so the cycle started all over again so quickly. And then, we had just several mass shootings in the last 24 hours at a hospital. There was a student shot outside a school in LA. There was a shooting outside of Walmart in Pennsylvania. I mean, again, it's so important to get people's attention, but it does feel like a never-ending cycle of trauma and grief and suffering. And I guess you asked me how I'm doing, and the answer is, I feel less well than I have felt since I started doing this work. And I think it's because I'm exhausted. But I am hopeful. And that's why I do this work every day. I actually do believe it's possible that we could see something happen in the Senate. I do believe lawmakers will act. We're already talking to governors who are going to act because of this. And I do believe we will be a bigger, stronger organization than we've ever been before. I mean, we've had hundreds of thousands of new volunteers come into the fold in a week.
So I wanted to just touch on, because I remember where we left our last conversation on this podcast was about sort of the relationship between sudden change and gradual change, which is a question that gets asked on the individual level. But Dharma teachers get asked all the time, like, is awakening sudden or gradual? And I like Pema Chodron gave the best answer ever, which I put in my book. She looked at the person asking the question and kind of wryly smiled and just said, I've always thought that sudden is the result of a heck of a lot of gradual. I love that answer in terms of how change works. But I think there's also just, hopelessness at our system itself. Like I was just thinking, I am trying to help volunteer for midterm elections, but just like when you look at the stats of the federal government and the outsized power of it, of conservatives and Republicans and people who are not doing the right thing, on guns or haven't so far. I have my skepticism that somebody like Ted Cruz is ever going to do the right thing on this, at least in this lifetime. But so 50 Democratic senators represent 41 million more people. Right. For the Democrats to hold the House of Representatives because of gerrymandering, they have to win by 5 to 7% popular vote. The last time we had a Republican president who won the popular vote was 1988. Right. Supreme Court is even worse. The 6 conservative members of the Supreme Court, you have 5 people appointed by presidents who lost the popular vote. And you have the 6th who's a credibly accused sexual harasser. He was actually appointed by a president who won the popular vote. And his wife helped plot a coup of the US government. And so you look at this and you just say, this system is not democracy, whatever it is. And so I think you see a lot of people on Twitter, which I try to titrate my Twitter approach because it just gets this cynicism and hopelessness really permeates that environment. But it's also very useful for information. You're one of the people who's always got really up to like what the media is not covering about gun violence. It's like, oh, just go follow Shannon Watts' feed and you'll get very precise information. It's almost like you work for, every news outlet saying like what is actually happening. But sometimes it just feels like whatever happens here, it's about minority power. And so you wonder, like, is this system going to survive in its current form? Because it's already so structurally skewed. And so I think it's great to say, like, okay, can we find a few decently sane Republican senators to take this filibuster thing, which who cares about a filibuster when like, what is that even? Like, and so the whole thing gets very hopeless. It's like reading a contract you can't understand and just saying like, I just want this thing, So it's interesting. Has your thought changed at all about kind of working within the system as all of this keeps happening and seemingly intensifies, especially with gun violence?
Yeah, I mean, there's so much there. So back to your quote from Pema. I mean, I think that's so right on, this idea of people get involved and then they get frustrated because what they want is overnight, holistic, systemic change. It isn't the way the system is set up. And the system is set up for incremental change. Now, that leads to revolutions. And I've certainly experienced that myself in the last decade. We've had a lot of really important wins. Everyone's waiting for this cathartic moment in the Senate. It has come in the House. And that's in large part because of Lucy McBath, a Moms Demand Action volunteer that we elected to Congress in Georgia in 2018. And in fact, we flipped the U.S. House makeup based on the issue of gun violence prevention in 2018. And then we did it again in Virginia in 2019. I think you could argue, looking at polling, that it was really Joe Biden's stance on guns and gun safety that helped him get elected. I share the frustration with the system and I worry about democracy. I would certainly say what I thought 10 years ago was that we would take on the gun lobby, specifically the NRA. We would show how corrupt they were. They would lose political power. They would lose money, and we would win. The first part of that happened. The NRA tried to declare bankruptcy last year and failed. There isn't anyone in America who doesn't understand how corrupt the National Rifle Association is. We've seen all the data, the money spent on clothing and vacations and kind of quid pro quo perks. But yet that agenda that they created back starting in the 1970s has now been adopted and embraced by the right wing. And I think you could argue that guns have become an organizing principle on the right, that they are a way to raise money. They're a way to recruit new members. They're totemic. They're a cultural signifier. So all the other issues that we're seeing in state houses, whether it's book bans or anti-CRT, anti-abortion, anti-women, anti-trans, what gets people in the door? Gun extremism. I never imagined that would become the case, that average everyday Republicans would become so to the right. And in fact, a study recently came out that said 22% of state Republican representatives belongs to some kind of right-wing group like the Proud Boys or the Oath Keepers or QAnon. So there's a real problem in this country that we have to unroot. There are ways to do that. I mean, we've been in dark periods in this country before where we've almost gone off the precipice, right? But it got pulled back. And I think that is the power of democracy. We still are a democracy. And as long as we are, we can use our voices and our votes. I mean, I've seen it happen again and again. I absolutely, I am privy to the backroom conversations happening right now in the Senate. And I know those senators feel pressure before a midterm election. I know there are lawmakers all over the country who do. And frankly, I don't care if people vote the right way because they've had a change of heart or because it's politically expedient. So as long as we still have this framework to operate in, which is democracy, it makes it even more important that we all do it as opposed to, I think cynicism is often an excuse for inaction. Mm-hmm. It's easier. It's easier to be cynical and just kind of live your life and say, I don't want to get involved in democracy, because I'm telling you, it's hard work, to show up every single day at gun bill hearings and to, understand the issue and to have these discussions with people who aren't like-minded. That's hard work. It's much easier to be cynical and not get involved than it is to be hopeful and do your part in the democracy.
Yeah. Thank you for all of that. And you're right that all of it is the action of democracy, all of the pressure. It's not just, is the representation skewed, but it does make it harder when you're like, okay, like, you're playing against somebody who doesn't play fairly and nobody seems to care,
Yep.
And your feeling is like, should I even keep playing this game? So let's go back to I think this ties in with the question of numbness and trauma. So like, because I do think that's a lot of it, right? And the sort of I think there's a style of thinking and a style of thought that I work with people on that I think also has the quality of depression, which is what I call a state of a thought that tries to convince you about a state of negative permanence, right? So as Buddhists, like everything is impermanent, but there's a style of thought of like everything is messed up. It always has been messed up and it always will be messed up, right? And I think these are, in our personal lives, these are the thoughts that we need to really guard against. But politically, it's like everybody's screwed, everybody's corrupt, nothing's ever going to change. Obviously, I think when people are getting involved with Mom's Demand, they're already, one thing that gets you out of that is some kind of righteousness, some kind of anger, some kind of feeling of like, I have to do something. But do you find people that you interact with in that state of like negative permanence, or are the people you're interacting mostly with, I can't go there, I have to do something?
We have created, I think, such a vibe, if you will, in our organization that is so, I think, uplifting.
Mm-hmm.
And that's what makes activism easier. So our motto is keep going. That's our internal motto. We know we're going to win ultimately the battle, but we're going to lose a lot of fights along the way. We expect to win. We expect to lose. We embrace those losses. We talk about what we can learn so that we win the next time. Mm-hmm. And you don't come in thinking, we're going to get this done and pack up and go away. You think, one, let's celebrate every win we have, no matter how small. Did your mayor sign a Wear Orange proclamation? Great. We're going to celebrate you. Did you stop a bad bill from even making it out of committee? That's huge. We're going to celebrate that win. Everything that is a win, we celebrate. We learn from losses. And we also really encourage self-care. We talk a lot about, this is a marathon, not a sprint, but it's a relay race too. And so you have to pass the baton to someone else when you have to prioritize yourself or your family or your well-being. I have stepped away many times because, I have 5 kids. And as you can imagine, somebody's always got an issue. And when they get really big, I have to take a break. What I've learned is when I come back, there are a lot of people who handled that issue with more energy and more innovation than maybe I would have. Unfortunately, the work is always going to be here when you get back. I think a lot about other social movements in this country. It took over 100 years for all women, Black and white, to get the right to vote. It took 100 years for the Civil Rights Act to pass. It took Mothers Against Drunk Driving over a decade to pass laws at a federal level. What if any of them had given up a year or two in? Those movements wouldn't have been successful. So I don't look at this as though, if this doesn't happen in the Senate, then we all give up and go home. I look at it as, how do we approach it the next time? How can we now pivot to state houses and city councils and school boards and do this work? The other thing that we do that gives me so much hope is that we train our own survivors and volunteers to run for office, and hundreds of them are up and down the ballot, right? We have 2 members of Congress who are volunteers. If you're paying attention, you know that QAnon is doing this in school boards. That makes it even more important. I think we actually all have a moral imperative to run for office. But when we ask volunteers specifically, what makes you join, and then why do you stay? It's 2 reasons. Number one, they feel we're winning. And as that goes back to this idea of celebrating every win. giving people all kinds of ways to get involved, cultural, legislative, electoral. And then the second reason is they meet their people. They create lifelong friendships and relationships because they get involved in this work with other people. In my mind, that's as good a reason as any to join a movement that's bigger than yourself, which is it does pull you out of that negative thinking, and at least you make connections with other people who think like you do. And I think post-COVID, that's more important than ever.
So yeah, I want to talk for a little while because I think you said something really important about feeling like you were gonna sort of beat this dragon called the NRA, and it almost became like a hydra with many heads. And it does seem like that ties in with this sort of savior complex, because it's something is interesting with the Trump movement right now. So I was just over Memorial Day weekend in Western North Carolina, in Asheville and the surrounding area, and when you get outside, that's the district that Madison Cawthorn just lost his primary in, which is I'll say it from a Buddhist standpoint, one of the members of Congress with the craziest external and probably, in my view, most harmful external manifestation. But you didn't see actually a lot of Trump signs as you're going through that. Saw a few signs on cars that were "Let's go, Brandon," which is, I think, is just so cowardly. It's like you don't even know why you hate somebody, and you're not even willing to say "F you" to their face. But please keep your guns. And you saw like a few signs that were like "Resist the Marxist Democrats." But it's pretty clear that this movement, I know Trump's still in the game. People think he might be running for office in 2024. But it feels like the movement has moved on in some ways from being Trump-centric. And we thought maybe we would like kill the dragon or the demagogue. And that would kind of, but it does feel like the movement has shifted. Does the same thing happen on the progressive side? Because I remember that like one of my, in terms of what, got you to action, definitely the Iraq War was a first moment. But in terms of actually doing some serious ongoing like political volunteering, it was coming out of the Obama campaign, 2007, 2008. And there were some really great things that came out of that were not just about him, but it did feel like we had sort of a savior complex around President Obama. And then there was a sense of like, well, it didn't go the way, we didn't get, universal health care. We didn't get this, or we didn't get that, or he lost the majority after having a huge majority, or, whatever it was. So how important, it just feels like it's part of human psychology, the charismatic leader, somebody to follow, somebody to inspire. And do we not need, is that sort of a false idol for you? Or do we need that to a certain degree while we still see it as sort of empty, so to speak? Or like, how important is the charismatic leader to a movement?
It's an interesting question. I mean, I guess the question is, do you consider Joe Biden to be a charismatic leader? I feel right now like the grassroots is leading. And I think whether it's the Supreme Court draft decision on abortion, or all of these horrific national shooting tragedies, or attacks, on trans kids and sort of the most marginalized in our society, I do believe that in particular, women and moms are organizing. And, we are often a swing vote. I was really disappointed to see, for example, white women voting overwhelmingly for Glenn Youngkin, the new governor in Virginia, just because they kind of wanted, I think, to teach Democrats a lesson for closing schools during COVID. And they weren't thinking about the bigger agenda there, right? This is a guy who had, so many racist dog whistles during his campaign, clearly pro-NRA, a lifetime NRA member. So I think if we can stay smart, if we can stay focused, then the value and the power of a grassroots movement overcomes all of that. It overcomes whether you're a leader. is someone who is like Donald Trump and is so magnetic and compelling. I mean, you have to give him credit, right? The fact that he has been able to win over this extremist base and get them to do whatever he wants. I had someone say to me that Democrats often play civics while Republicans are sort of playing a role. They're like in a movie, they're actors. They don't play by the rules. They're just doing things to get attention. And I just don't know that Democrats will ever do that, because we do believe in fairness. And I think we do believe in playing by the rules and decorum. Michelle Obama said, we have to go high when they go low. And I do think I don't know that that'll ever change. And so when you feel like you're on the right side of history and you're feeling like you have to hold yourself to a different standard, I'm not sure we ever get to the place that the right is. And I think that's why they've had success, because people think Donald Trump is funny. They think he's magnetic. They think he's sort of this father figure leader. And I don't know that we as a party are going to buy into that.
Yeah. I hear what you're saying. I would say that people, I agree that there's like decorum and dignity. If we had like, what some Asian countries had, or like what the UK had, where we have a royal family that sort of, if there is any intelligence to that, because it was also part of the Shambhala mythology too, that there's sort of like this royalty aspect. If we had that, like what it might represent in a positive sense was some sort of, somebody who represents the values of a certain way of being in the world. And it does seem like it's interesting, because if we had one royal family, like I would nominate the Obamas, whether you agree with everything they've done, there's just a sense of like, that would be
moral leadership. Yeah,
moral leadership, and like people you would trust as, as exemplars of something, not perfect people. So, Obama wasn't a movie star. He wasn't Reagan. He wasn't a reality TV star, which is the one and only thing Donald Trump actually was successful at. But he had a certain, like he's narrating National Geographic shows on Netflix right now. And there is a sense of like, I'll listen to his voice all day. So there was something very charismatic, right? That maybe there were other reasons he beat Hillary Clinton, certain misogyny components or linking her. But there is some kind of like, he plays the part. And I wonder, because I don't know how people feel about Joe Biden. Joe Biden has actually exceeded my expectations of who I thought he was going to be, and been kind of relentlessly hammered by mainstream media in ways that feel neither fair nor accurate, The
Biden-Harris administration has done more than any other administration in history on this issue through executive action. I mean, they have been outstanding. President Biden recently, after these tragedies, said he would do more, which he can. But the other thing we're not talking about, Ethan, is misinformation or disinformation. We saw after the Uvalde shooting that congressmen were using talking points from these disinformation sites immediately after the shooting about the suspect and their motive. And given, this online arena, I think more and more it just becomes such a danger to democracy as well. And gun extremism fits right in there. Because a lot of times, this rhetoric or these conspiracy theories originate from, if not the NRA, then their very excited base, and that's a real danger too.
Yeah. So let's go back into like the where you started, just the experience of having to like, as they say sometimes in the Zen tradition, like sit in the fire of all this. So if you're me, I try to glean the news. I try to do what I can. I do try to stay up to date with things. And that's a lot, like to hold my world. You have 5 children, which I think is crazy. Like nobody, I'm very grateful that you did that. I only have one. That's a lot to hold, right? You have all your social circles. I have a lot of people that I'm, keeping track of to a certain degree. And that's a lot to hold in one's heart. But in some ways, it also feels like this modern moment, like we're just so aware of all the pain and, Ukraine and that our mind can constantly be, and our heart can just be like torn apart, like with, all of these different heat wave in India and Pakistan. That's, deadly. That does sound like what some sci-fi novels said climate change was going to be like. So when you're actually going into the fire as you are, and like every time there's a story of like somebody being killed by a gun, you're like, let me move towards that. What's your strategy for how to work with that, as a practitioner or personal? Like, do you talk to your therapist before that? Do you do loving kindness meditation? Like, how do you hold all that and not be severely traumatized?
I do think there's something about my personality that made me uniquely able to do this. I'm able to put in different places in my brain anger and empathy and sadness, and I'm able to really focus in on the anger, and so that it's not a corrosive anger that eats me up from the inside. It's, I think, hopefully a righteous anger. Although I'm sure sometimes if you follow me on Twitter, it might cross the line, but it's generally a righteous anger that I use for my activism and to be very clear about what is happening and how people can fix it. I don't know why. I mean, I wish I could tell you, Ethan, why, as someone who's not a gun violence survivor, I have felt compelled every day for 10 years as a volunteer to do this work. I don't really know. I don't really understand, other than I feel outraged as a mom, as a woman, as an American. And I want to protect my community, my family. And this is how I best know how to do it. Meditation is a huge part of this work for me. I meditate. I try to meditate every day without fail. I will admit, when there's a huge crisis, there are times that I go to bed and I can't believe I forgot. But I would also say my meditation has changed significantly over the last 3 years. It went from sort of sitting on the cushion thinking I am meditating to being completely immersed in the meditation. That has made me feel better and healthier. And it has made me realize how integral it is to the work that I do. But I do think we're all walking around somewhat traumatized. Even if we haven't been impacted by gun violence, we're all sort of secondhand survivors. 50% of Americans have been impacted in some way by gun violence. And how can you look, when we look at the data that kids that go through lockdown drills, we know for sure that they experience more anxiety, many of them, that they experience depression, sleeplessness, worsening school performance, not just students, teachers as well. So how can you not believe that we watch the news or we do these drills in our workplaces and not feel that same anxiety, depression, sleeplessness, worsening performance, and whatever we're involved in? So I guess it just comes back to, this is such an important tool for me, and I'm not sure how I would be able to get up and do it every day without meditation.
Yeah. Do you ever meditate before you're on national TV? The one time I was on CNN, I had to sit it was a really interesting experience because I've only done it once on cable news. It was do you remember when there was a Tiger Woods scandal, and the Fox News anchor, Britt Hume,
I do.
Said that, he's a Buddhist and you need to get
some Jesus.
Yeah, basically. So CNN was looking for a Buddhism expert, and and I was like, oh great, I'm going to go on CNN and get in a war with Fox News. But I didn't do it that way. But it was fascinating because I was in New York, so that's probably why they chose me. And you go to, the Time Warner Center, and you they put you in a room. You're not with, it was Rick Sanchez, who is not a news anchor anymore. And they put you in a different room, right? Because there's this feeling of they can call you from anywhere in the world, even if you're right there. and you're just kind of in this room basically by yourself. It almost felt like an MRI or something, or waiting for the doctor to come in, except you're going to be on national TV. So what's that like being, you probably didn't plan 10 years ago that you were going to have over 500,000 Twitter followers, that you were going to be the person that like MSNBC calls up when a crisis happens and things like this. How is it holding that? Because that was pretty nerve-wracking for me, and I only did it once.
It is so nerve-wracking. I mean, I'm sweating right now. Like anytime I do any of these, it makes me sweaty. But to be on national television it is such an adrenaline rush, because millions of people are watching you, and you want to say the right thing, and you don't want to mess up and then have that follow you and have it taken by the NRA or gun extremists and used against you. There's so many different outcomes of being the tip of the spear, and it feels very risky. And so I have days like in the last 2 weeks where I'm on television 3 or 4 times a day if I'm not doing, radio interviews. And I think what you said is so important. Yes, meditating in the morning to prepare myself for that kind of overwhelming stimulation is really key to being centered. And then again, at the end of the day, to sort of release all of that pressure. But I can't tell you how exhausted I am after one of those hits, because there's so much prep, there's so much pressure. Then it happens, and of course your heart is racing, and your nervous system is so, over the top, and then you're done. And it's like whoosh, it just all comes out. And then sometimes you have to do that several times a day. And you're right. I never planned that I would be doing this. I was terrified of public speaking. I write about this in my book. I mean, I would actually call in sick to work if I thought I had to present to people. I never ever imagined that I would be doing this all the time. And I'm not even sure I would have started Moms Demand Action if I knew that was a job requirement. But now, that part comes easier, but I'm not sure the television part you ever get used to.
Mm-hmm. Do you ever feel like you have to correct? Because people who watch that interview, it was a lot of me stepping out of the frame of the questions that they wanted to ask me about Buddhism, and they kept wanting to ask me if I thought what Britt Hume said was insensitive about Buddhism, which I didn't want to answer that question.
Good job.
So do you find yourself having to step out of like the question that's given into the frame that feels more appropriate for you, or?
Well, the interesting part, and I think what helped me get Moms Demand Action off the ground, is that I was a communications executive, for over a decade before I started Moms Demand Action. So I wasn't doing the interviews myself. I was prepping other people to do them. So I have a very good framework for how to do an interview, how to pivot, how to make sure they don't catch you in what you were just talking about, right? They kind of want to trick you into an answer that will be damaging in some way that they can use to just reinforce their narrative. So I'm not always successful. For example, I was so exhausted the other day. I said on national television that there had been 300,000 incidents of gun violence on school grounds since Columbine. There's actually 300,000 students impacted. So then I had to, go on Twitter and correct that. So no one is perfect, and mistakes are going to happen when you're doing this. But I'm so grateful I have that knowledge and that training, because it really does help me when I'm in demand because there's some kind of shooting tragedy. Yeah.
So just pivoting to like how people can actually engage, which I think is such an, obviously for the social media crowd, right? We often go on social media not to avoid engagement, to avoid the steps. And I was really fascinated by what you said about stepping into the anger, that is kind of the avenue to get back to like, okay, what can be done here? That's not a typical, classic Buddhist answer. I agree. It's like, it's there in the Buddhist teachings if you actually look, deeply enough. But I always find engagement is really important. In 2020, we had a small group of the Dharma Vote community, which is getting going again if people want to get involved.
It's amazing.
And we mostly work just through Vote Forward to write letters to, low frequency voters. and working as a Sangha or community. But Moms Demand has such a huge and national infrastructure. So what does it look like to get involved with Moms Demand, and are there any Moms Demand meditation groups yet? Or
that is a great idea. I love that idea, actually,
because moms do meditate.
Tons. I get so, thanks to you, they featured Moms Demand Action recently in Tricycle, and the response we got to that was just overwhelming, right? But what we found was people wanted to get involved, and too often what happens is you say, I want to get involved, and then you never hear back, or you're not really told what you can do, or you're just asked to donate. And our motto is, don't thank us, join us. There's a story about a Catholic priest. I was raised in the Catholic tradition, and he was making sandwiches for the unhoused. And people would send him donations to make more sandwiches. And he would send that money back in an envelope. This was back, before social media and email. And he would return their money, and he would send them a note in all caps that said, make your own damn sandwiches. And I just love that, because it's so true. Like, don't just help me make sandwiches, or don't pay for me to make sandwiches. Actually, make your own. And when you join us, and you can do that by texting the word READY to 64433, we make it super easy. And a volunteer will actually reach out to you where you live. They will tell you what meetings are coming up, how you can plug in and get involved in a short term. They will bring you into the fold. You'll come to a meeting. It's we're not just moms, we're dads, non-moms, not just women. We have Students Demand Action now too, but we're mostly run by women, and a lot of type A women who will make sure that you leave that.
I've never met one of those before.
Well, they move a lot of mountains, and
they do.
I hear so many people say, wow, I just went to a Moms Demand Action meeting, and those women are not messing around. You will leave there with small or large action items, whatever you choose. And as I said, right, it's cultural. You may be teaching people about secure gun storage. It's legislative. You may want to promote legislation in your city council or your state house, or maybe even policies in your school board. You may be wanting to stop bad legislation or meet with your lawmakers. And then it's electoral. The midterm elections are about 150 something days away. So we should be getting out the vote right now. And we have the most sophisticated technology that most organizations only make available to their leaders. We give it to every volunteer. So we help you. There's an app called Hustle, for example, that helps you reach voters and tell them, who are your gun sense candidates? How do you vote for them? When, where, et cetera. So there's all kinds of ways to get involved. And I just think it's so important to just find a piece of the work you're passionate about and do that, right? Drips on a rock. It all leads to some kind of collective movement.
So text READY to 64433. And especially if you're not a mom, if you're a dad, if you're neither mom nor dad, it could be not Moms Demand.
That's right. Students.
That would be very Buddhist, right?
Yep.
Are you a mom or are you not? Is there any mom actually there? No. Well, Shannon, thank you so much for taking time out of what I know has been an insane couple of weeks. I mean, obviously, the response people always have is, well, I'm not suffering as much as some people are. And I get having that response, but it's also important, I think, to just validate and acknowledge when somebody's been really burdened and stressed with doing a lot of work. And you've been doing incredible amounts of work on this issue, especially the last couple of weeks. And it does feel like maybe there's a shift happening. I mean, the New York Yankees feed is tweeting about, gun deaths being the number one way that kids die in America,
yes,
which I did not know.
It is now the leading cause of death in America for children and teens.
Which is unbelievable. I've shared that stat with a few people, and it's just like, it's hard to wrap your brain around. But maybe there's, if the Yankees are tweeting about politics or, these issues, maybe there is a chance to actually, gain some of the sanities that some other democracies have, or most other democracies, maybe all other democracies have found on this issue. So I just really appreciate all the work that you're putting in. And
thank you.
Yeah. So Shannon Watts, Mom's Demand. And my plea to everybody is please, for the rest of 2022, don't not meditate. Do meditate, but please also find ways to take your practice off the cushion, especially if you're in the United States right now. It's so important, such an inflection point right now. So for Ethan, for the road home, sorry, I'm a little flustered myself. For the road home, this is Ethan Nichtern, and thanks for tuning in, and we'll see you all next time.